So I was listening to a song. You might know the song. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. And everybody knows it. It sounds like it comes straight from the Talmud. It actually doesn't. It's, searching its history, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes of its history. It's actually a very recent statement. The originer of the statement is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, but he didn't actually say it that way. He just said that in the journey of life, there is a narrow bridge. He doesn't say the whole world is a narrow bridge. Journey of life is a narrow bridge, and he doesn't say don't get afraid. He says don't allow fear to take you over. Lehit pachet, don't allow fear to take you over. About 30, 40 years ago, one of the Jewish composers kind of took the words and twisted it and changed it to Kol Olam Kulo Gesher Tzamro. The entire world is a very narrow bridge. Ve'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. And the main thing to recall is to have no fear at all. So that's actually a statement from somebody today, Rabbi Baruch Chait, actually. Rabbi Nachman Breslov was talking more in a narrower perspective, that in the journey of life there is a narrow bridge, not that the whole world is a narrow bridge. So that was actually just an interesting nugget. But it got me thinking. I mean, it's become one of the most popular statements. It's probably the most known statement of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and one of the most known Jewish songs, and not only Jewish. People know it all around the world, this idea of the whole world is a narrow bridge. And now that we know that it's not a piece of Talmud, we can actually dissect it. And the reason I'm dissecting is not because, let's just dissect songs. It's because at the heart of this song, the reason it resonates is because the themes are very, very powerful. What do we mean when we say that the world is a narrow bridge? What's the difference if it's a wide bridge or a narrow bridge? Is there a difference between wide bridges and narrow bridges? So I saw this interesting explanation that says, if I tell you, to walk on the floor in a straight line for 10 meters, you'll do it easily. But if I now took that line, that distance that you walked, the width and the length, and picked it up 100 meters and said, walk that, and now there's no sides, there's no nothing to lean on. Even though you were able to walk straight on the floor, you're now unable to walk straight unless you're a tightrope walker, because the fear of heights immobilizes you. But 1 second, if all I did is move the bridge down to the bottom, you're able to walk that 10 meters easily. So why, when I pick it up, can't you? Because obviously the fear of heights, the fear of what if, the stakes are much higher than if I'm walking at a bunch of tiles on the floor. So in other words, the idea that could be understood about this idea of a narrow bridge is that pretty much life is a tightrope. Now, it'll be interesting, feel free to share your commentaries of how you understood. It's like one of those statements that when you actually start thinking about it, what does it actually mean that the world's a narrow bridge? That's a very unusual statement. Like, what does that mean? Feel free to comment. Narrow from what? So perhaps that's one interpretation of it, and that is that the world is a walk. It's walking, but with huge stakes. A narrow bridge, and there's very little to maneuver. The question is that an empowering thought or a disempowering thought? Does that feel exciting? Does that not feel exciting? What does it mean to you that, like the world is narrow? Is that empowering? Is it true? So sorry we're going to do this today, but I really want to unpack. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's like one of the big statements, almost a cliche. Is it true? Is the world a narrow bridge? So yes, there are some things about this world that are narrow. You don't have a lot of place between good and evil. If you make one turn, you destroy your life. You make the other turn, you build up your life. Fine. But is that what it means? Is the message that life is scary, just like the person walking on a tightrope? That the message that the life is scary? What's the message? What's the message of this statement? That the entire world is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing to recall is to have no fear. What's it saying? And there's no question that this song, I've seen a lot of new YouTube videos on this song in our time, because many people are feeling now the truth of the statement that the world is feeling narrow and narrow. So Bernice, you say that the message is overcoming fear. Fair enough, but that's only the second half of the statement. So have no fear, fine. So just lo lefached. That's a beautiful message. Everyone agrees with that. But my question is really exploring this idea of the world being narrow. So in COVID, I think people are feeling that the world is very narrow. There's just, our lives have become very narrow, very monotonous, very little variety, much less experiences. The world has become narrow, but is that the way the world is naturally? And is that the way the world is by default? I would argue with that. I'm not convinced the world is narrow. I've personally sung this song a million times and I still get emotional when I hear it. But I'm starting to wonder, like, first of all, Rav Nachman never said it. So it's just a modern statement that was said recently. So I feel very entitled to question it. Kol ha'olam kulo, the entire world is narrow. But if the whole world is narrow, then it is pretty fearful. Why is that an empowering message that the world is narrow? I think that's actually wrong. I think the world is not narrow. I think there are some journeys of life that are narrow. There are some journeys of life that you have very little, leeway. You break a boundary, you break a boundary in a marriage, you break a boundary as a parent. There's certain things you can't do. But even within that, there's a lot of, marriage is wide. It's not narrow. A narrow marriage has no spice, has no fun, has no personality. A narrow parenting method is actually dangerous. So the world is not narrow. The world is actually wide. Sometimes it may be too wide, it's too many options, and that's what gets us afraid. But I wouldn't say that the world is a narrow place. Would you? Because again, that image of the world is a narrow bridge and you're crossing over raging waters and it's chaotic and it's scary, like that itself causes you to fear. In other words, the first half of the statement is a very fear-inducing statement. The entire world is a narrow bridge. That's terrifying. Really? Is that what I'm doing? I'm walking on a tightrope the whole day? How am I not supposed to be afraid? Think about that. I don't think the world is narrow. I think the problem with COVID is we're starting to think that the world is narrow. We're starting to feel that the world is like out to get us, or we have so little options, our freedoms are being taken away. But that's not a true perspective of life. Life is expansive. Life is multiple options. Life is multiple routes. Life has, each one of us is on our own journey. 7 billion people on their own journey, and even our own journey has so many different ways. Our lives are not narrow. Our lives are wide, our lives are broad. And I think if we allow COVID to convince ourselves our lives are narrow, that's a problem. And by the way, I agree fully with that statement, not to be afraid. Of course, 100%. But that's not my point. Everyone knows not to be afraid. In other words, everyone knows the truth of that statement. But I'm not convinced the world is narrow. And the problem is that we are convincing ourselves the world is narrow, especially in our time. People are losing their sense of wonder of this world. This world is becoming way too predictable, way too fear-inducing. And you see, the more people become narrow in their thinking, the more radical we become. Our politics becomes more radical. Our conversations become more radical. Our relationships develop less nuance. Our thoughts develop less nuance. Like I found even within myself, the ability after a year of COVID to keep my mind broad beyond COVID, I've explored in the last few days, it is a challenge because COVID is making us narrow. It's making us with a very small variety. We're not having holidays, and we're not having visits, and we're not having a lot of experiences, etc., etc. And it's narrowing our mind, but that's a very dangerous thing. When the mind becomes narrow, the mind is being squeezed into a place it doesn't belong. The mind is supposed to be expansive. God gave us a mind that can imagine anything. God gave us a mind that could learn so much. One of the incredible things of this past year, the daily shiurim, each day I have to prepare for shiurim, is just realizing how much material there is. Like I'll never run out of material. There's just so much endless material to keep our minds broad. And for me, it's like a gift. Like sometimes, people ask me, why did you overcommit to 4 shiurim a day? Because it's forcing me to keep on thinking of new ideas. Otherwise, I'm just going to be thinking COVID, politics, corruption, economy, death, etc. You can't think like that. That is narrow. Torah doesn't make us narrow. I would say, don't be afraid. The world isn't narrow. I would write it differently. Don't be afraid because the world isn't narrow. There's so many options. There's so much beauty. There's so much opportunity. There's so much ways of thinking. There's so much freedom. And the moment you find yourself thinking that life has lost its options, the moment we find ourselves thinking that life is narrow and that there's this gushing bridge that's, this gushing water under the bridge, that itself is the fear. That is fear, because that is a fear-inducing idea, which isn't true. The world's not out to get you. You're not in the narrow bridge. You're not about to fall over. You can't live like that. That's the way we've been living with this COVID. Oh my gosh, if I go out, I'm going to get COVID. I'm not saying we shouldn't live with caution, but some of the fear is overblown. It's overblown because, not because it's disproportionate to the COVID. It's disproportionate to our psyche. We can't handle this fear. It's destroying our mental health. The research is just getting freakier and freakier about what COVID is doing to our mental health. And at some stage, I always turn to people and I say, at what expense are you protecting your physical health? I'm not saying don't be cautious. Again, let me be very, very careful. But you could still be cautious, but while making sure that your mental health is not suffering too much. It will suffer a bit, but when our mood is just getting darker and darker, I bumped into somebody a few days ago, and this was a person that I've always seen as a joie de vivre, a joy of life. And I've known this person for pretty much my whole time in South Africa. And for the first time in my life, I just looked at this person and I just saw blink, blink. And I was like, no, this is not okay. We're becoming too narrow. Yes, we have to watch our health, but we also have to make sure that our sanity and our sense of security and our sense of inner peace and our sense of faith is not being compromised on that altar. And yes, it's a hard paradox to live. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not like, okay, so what are you saying, Rabbi? Just walk around. No, I'm not saying that. But life is about embracing paradox. Life's not about being narrow. If there's ever a simple answer, you know it's not true. And there's something we repeated often in our shiurim. If you ever find that life offers you simple answers, guaranteed, either it's religion, in other words, it's telling you, simple truths, and that's fine. But if it's in the complexity of life, they're offering you simple solutions, know that that's not where the truth is. Truth is in complexity, in nuance, in subtlety, in multiple ideas conflicting with each other and finding the bridge to cross. But unfortunately, many of us are becoming narrow. Some people narrow in one way. In other words, we're only focused on our happiness and not focused on our physical health. That's narrow. Or focused extremely on our health and the paranoia of what's going to happen at the expense of so many other areas of our life. Again, if I watch my health and there's no cost to it, then of course. But if there's cost, then I'm forced into a complex area. And no, I cannot break the law. But yes, I have to ask myself tough questions and make tough decisions each day. Instead of making one blanket decision, I'm out of this world. Being forced to have tough questions is the complexity of life. And that's where the beauty of life is. The beauty of life is in its constant choice making. If there's no choices left, if pretty much I've just locked myself in a cave and I've gone in hibernation, then I'm not living the embracing of life. I'm living a narrow bridge. And the world is not narrow. Even in the time of COVID, that we're supposed to watch our health, our options cannot become so narrow, because then we've lost out on life. We are closing, we are locking down so many areas of ourself, and that's dangerous. So what am I saying, Rabbi? I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying that there's an answer. But just because there's no answer doesn't mean there's no question. I'll repeat. Just because there are no simple answers doesn't mean that the hard questions don't have to be asked. And maybe the answer that you'll get will be partially wrong or partially right. But not asking the question is so dangerous. And I'll give you an example from beyond COVID. You know, many people will say that religious thinkers are, by definition, narrow. Because, you know, you have to believe in God, and you have to believe in lots of values, and you have to believe in a certain kind of life and a certain kind of marriage, et cetera, you're narrow. And their argument is that you have to be broader than that. And in a way, I agree that religion can make you narrow if you allow it to. But ultimately, religion is just giving you a structure. It's just telling you a basic framework of what to live in. But beyond, within it, it's absolutely not narrow. And it's one of the ideas that I've repeated. It's probably, if you ask me, the idea I repeat more to religious kids, because I talk, every once in a while I'm having a talk. I've probably spoken this thought to thousands of religious kids over the years. It's one thing: don't become narrow. Don't allow religion to fool you that it's narrow. It's not. It's just a framework. Now, what does that mean? Do I have all the answers? No, but that's not the point. If I offer you the answers, then again, it's narrow. A life that has all the answers is a narrow life. Life is about living with questions and learning how to be comfortable even without perfect answers. That's life. The greatest thinkers are the people that ask the best questions, not the ones who have the best answers. Because very few of life's big questions have great answers. You know why? Because our logic is limited, and the answers are ultimately godly. We won't fully understand it in our limited capacity, but that doesn't mean we don't ask the question and try to find out as much as we can. Why do bad things happen to good people? What am I here for? What are my challenges here to teach me? How do I live with confidence and optimism in a time of COVID? How do I keep my personality even within the confines of religion? Is religion enabling or disabling? All these questions, they're hard questions. And their answers are not satisfactory. You know why? Because they're not questions on a test. They're life itself. But the question itself leads you to depth. The question itself is a big part of the answer. As the sages say, the Kabbalistic sages say, the question of a wise person is half the answer. You can tell the difference of the people's wisdom based on the questions they ask. Is it a shallow question or a deep question? And a deep question is half the answer. My point is, we cannot allow COVID to make us this narrow. We can't allow COVID to disable our personality, to shut down parts of ourselves. Yes, there's things we cannot do, but me as a person, I can't be shut down. Maybe you could shut down what I can do, where I could go. But if I, as a person, am being shut down in my psyche, that there's parts of myself that are not being activated, that's a problem. If I've lost my simchat ha'chaim, joie de vivre, my joy of life, if I've lost creativity, if I've lost an optimism, if I've lost an appreciation for friendship, that's not COVID's fault. That's mine. Is it easy to fight it? No, but I have to. So maybe in COVID, the world is a narrow bridge, but I, in my mind, can be wide. I don't have to be narrow. I have to convince myself that the world is not a narrow bridge, even if it seems that way. And that's how I'm not afraid. When I realize, no, I'm not. I'm not in a cave. I'm not locked down. My mind is not in lockdown. And this is something that as Jews and as human beings, we've known throughout history, that my situation doesn't define me. I can allow my mind to take me wherever it needs to take me. I'm not defined by any idea. I'm not defined by any place. Nothing defines me other than how I define myself. And the truth is, I shouldn't define myself. I should allow myself to be multiple definitions. And as we go into a new year, 2021, with so many unknowns, we have to work this year. And I actually recorded this year yesterday. I didn't send it out yesterday. It was called, Will 2021 Be a Repetition of 2020? I can't live in fear. I can't be narrow. Last year made many of us narrow. Our feeling that the world is our oyster, our feeling that I can do so much was taken away from us, but mainly from our children. And I get it. No one's judging that thought. It makes sense. But it's such a dangerous thought. Because when a child thinks that the world has no options for them, then why am I here? What do I have to offer this world? And yes, it's much easier to find yourself and to find the wideness of life when you have so many options. But that's too easy. And life, unfortunately, doesn't often offer us the easy route. Once upon a time, think about it being a youngster, your children's age, nightlife, you go to fly international, you dream of studying overseas and having a massive life over there. You're going to London. Meanwhile, if you go to London right now, you don't have a nightlife. You have less of a life than we have even in Joburg. Australia, parts of it, major lockdown. The US, you go to New York, there's no COVID, but even there's no nightlife. It's different. The world has taken away a lot of our options, but that's our options of what we do, not the options of who we are. This should be the year that we discover more about ourselves, not less of ourselves. This is a year that we activate more talents within ourselves that maybe have never been activated than less. Yes, maybe the world outside has become narrow, but that allows you for your own world to expand because you're forced to not look for life outside yourself, but to look for life inside yourself. And suddenly, wow. Like one of the things I've found myself, I haven't found an outlet yet, but like I've always had a passion to do something with music. I'm not a musician, but I'm a bit of a composer and I like writing, etc. And like I found this deep desire within me recently. I have to find an outlet. I haven't found it yet, but I haven't had this desire till lockdown. I had it when I was younger, but like this deep desire, I have to find a musical outlet. And please God, I will. And many other things within myself that like talents or potential ideas that have laid dormant are now surfacing. Because if the world has taken my options away, now I could go inside and find my world. And that in many ways is a blessing. You're not taking your kids to extramurals every day, so you do have more time. You're not seeing your grandkids every day, so you have more time. So what are you doing with that time other than feeling sorry? Are you expanding your inner self, your world? We've spoken about this in the past, that each one of us has to be an explorer, like Columbus, but instead of going and exploring the world outside, exploring our world inside, because you are not fully discovered. You are a globe that is barely accessed. You have not discovered your America yet. You've not discovered your Australia yet. You have not discovered all the oceans within you. We are so big. The human being is created in God's image. You know how big that is? Do you know what that means? Do you know how many layers you have within yourself? Infinite, infinite. And yes, life doesn't allow us to discover a lot of it because based on our circumstances, based on where we live, based on the school we went to, based on the choices we made in life. But now you have the time, so go, explore. It's not a narrow bridge, it's a massive ocean. And you are on a boat, and you can take the boat wherever you want. You're not on a narrow bridge that tells you from here to here. No, you're on a boat and you can go wherever you want. And yes, some of the parts within ourselves are not beautiful, they're dark. And maybe that's a perfect time not to go through those areas, go through therapy. Maybe it's the right time to deal with some of our darkness, but that's not my main focus. My main focus is the light inside of you, the continents within inside you, the beauty within, the talents that have not been given a voice. And no one's judging. Yeah, life didn't offer you the opportunity, but now it is. So activate ourselves. This should be a year that we're transformed, not from the outside, from within. That we enrich ourselves by discovering how much richness we have within us. The human being is born with so much riches. But like a bank account, unless you access it, the richness is just sitting in a Swiss bank account. It's not doing anything. It's there, but it's not doing anything. Take it out, invest it, play with it, dabble with it, get to know it. The moment we think we know ourselves is the moment our journey is over, because there's nothing left to discover. I know myself, that's who I am. The moment I define myself is when my journey ends. There's nothing left. I'm not saying COVID is not messy. Gosh, like, do I have to tell you? I mean, we all know it. We're living through it. We've been through this for a year. We're all in the world of COVID. We've all had to make difficult choices, and we've all been faced with tough areas of life that come with it. But as I said, like I said 2 days ago in the shir, I said, it's time to say COVID goodbye. COVID can no longer define us. It's enough. Friends, it's enough. It's stinging. It's like, your friend who had a breakup and just can't stop talking about the breakup. And you're like, honey, there's still love out there, okay? I know you had a breakup. You'll move on. Or, the person who's still complaining about their parents 30 years later. Honey, you've spent more years out of your home than in your parents' home. So do you mind? Yes, they were traumatic, etc. It's time to move. Yes, you can explore it, but don't define yourself that way. COVID is becoming like that. It's becoming like seriously, can we not talk about that? Just not that. Because it's narrowing us. It's making us so small. Whenever we find ourselves talking about the same topic day in and day out, we're becoming small. So if all I talk about is fashion every day, I'm becoming small. If all I'm talking about is the corruption, I'm talking about small. If all I'm talking about is my fears, etc. If our conversations have become so narrow that pretty much that's all we're talking about, friends, we're becoming narrow. We can't allow ourselves to be narrow. The world is not a narrow bridge, not at all. If you ask me if I believe in that song, I'll continue singing that song, but boy, I don't believe in it anymore. There are areas in life that are narrow, as Rab Nachman said. Rab Nachman did say that there are areas in life that are narrow, and yes, we have to deal with them. But life as a general rule, nah, it's not narrow at all. It's wide, it's expansive, it's beautiful, it's magnificent, it's inspiring. How does he say? I'll tell you exactly what Rab Nachman's statements say. He says like this: whoever wants to enter into the service of God will remember this well. Give yourself much encouragement and do what you can in serving God. Then, as you build up many days and years with God's help, you will surely enter into the gates of holiness, for God is full of compassion and wants your service very much. And no, Each time you detach and shift just a bit from materialism and you get closer to God, all the movements and changes accumulate, combine, and bind together and come to your aid at a time of need, when God forbid there is any trouble and misfortune. Know too, and this is where he says it, that a person must cross a very, very narrow bridge. And the main rule is to not be frightened at all. In other words, in life, there are journeys that you have to carry across a narrow bridge. He doesn't say that the whole life is a narrow bridge. Know too that a person must cross a very, very narrow bridge, and the main thing is don't be frightened. Yes, there are areas in life that are narrow. But far be it from me to argue with the great, the great song of our time. But no, friends, life ain't narrow, not even in the slightest. And the moment we feel it's narrow, that is the biggest fear of all. Shkoyach, everybody, and thank you.